Hello and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know, a podcast about classical education, old stuff, and whatever we feel like talking about. My name is Thomas Magby, and I'm joined, as always, by Graham Donaldson.
Hello.
And AJ Hannenberg.
That's me.
And I have no witty introduction. All I can say is that Graham is talking today about the Templar.
No witty introduction. You could have made a pun on contemplate with Templars. You could have...
That's a stretch.
That's a stretch. That's the pun I could have
made. At least
made.
my stretch is better than like mailing it in.
Sorry. Sorry I wanted to get to your content
so
quick because it is great. And whatever. Okay.
I accept your flattery.
Thank you. Flattery will get you everywhere, my friend.
We are going to finish up the Templars today. This Templar part 3? I think it's part 3.
Yeah.
Part 3. So the Templar trilogy. And we sort of left on a cliffhanger last time. So a little bit of a fast recap. We've got a bro in charge of the Templars, and that bro's name is Gerard of Riedefort. If we remember Gerard of Riedefort, he was super bummed and angry at Raymond of Tripoli because Raymond of Tripoli is like, dude, I got this woman you got to marry. And then Raymond of Tripoli married that woman to another guy.
Yeah.
And Gerard, in his anger, joined the Templars and took a vow of chastity and then became the head of the Templars. Anyway, they're not buddies.
Sounds like a rough breakup.
I know. Real rough breakup. And then the king of Jerusalem was Guy de Lusignan, I believe Lusignan. Do you guys remember how Guy became king?
Is it he made the deal with he shook hands with that one guy?
That's right. He shook hands, and his wife was crowned queen, and she's like, I choose my husband to be king. And so he became king because all of the other kings either died of leprosy or one was a little baby and he died, and they didn't really have a good one, and they asked Henry II, and he's like, no, man, I'm not doing that. And then they asked the king of France, and he was too young, Philip II, and he's not doing that. So Guy of Lusignan became kind of king by he was the only guy left. And anyway, so he was king, and
you'd still feel good about that, right? You still get to be king.
Yeah, you still get to be king.
Yeah.
I'd feel great about that.
Yeah.
Although Jerusalem is so highly contested and sounds dangerous.
Yes, very dangerous. And
so you probably wouldn't be king for very long.
Yeah, I'd maybe rather be king somewhere else or leader of the assassins.
Remember those guys. Yeah. Anyway, and so then, and you remember Gerard of Riedefort was somebody who always threw himself headlong into battle and mocked anybody that wanted to do like strategy. And retreats and that kind of thing. And so that got him into trouble. And last podcast, it got the head of the Hospitallers killed.
Yeah.
The one guy that was like, we shouldn't do this. And Gerard's like, you're right. We shouldn't do this if we're big babies. And since we're not, we're doing this. And then that guy died and Gerard survived. And then Saladin, who's in charge of sorry, I almost said Mongolians. They're coming up today. Who's in charge?
Make a joke about him being a vegan?
Saladin?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
If I haven't,
yeah,
consider the joke made.
It salad.
Salad, yeah.
I feel like you have to make the joke for it to be counted as...
No, it's...
Are you just pointing to the two?
Okay,
thank you. Good. We'll make the joke for ourselves.
Make the joke in your head, your audience.
And now, so there was this big battle called Cresson, and that was where...
Croissant? We have... What?
Croissant.
Croissant.
Gluten?
Yeah, what?
No, salad.
Salad and croissant.
Croissant, maybe? And then
Ballad of Brunch.
That was where Gerard was like, let's ride. And then everyone was defeated, and they had to go home and lick their wounds. Okay. And there was that one guy who died.
Sounds really gross.
Who died really gloriously, and all the Saracens were like, we don't want to kill you. And then his body was turned into relics, including his nether regions.
Yeah.
Okay, we talked about this.
We did.
All right.
Yeah.
So then 2 months after that battle, Saladin goes and he besieges Tiberias. And, you know, it kind of sucks. You don't want your town to be besieged.
Right.
But Raymond of Tripoli's wife was in Tiberias. And he's like, guys, we got to go get her. Mm-hmm. We got to go save her. And so they go but to get to Tiberias, they basically had to traverse this big, long, dry desert area to get there. And Saladin's waiting at the other end. And so there was this point where they're standing where their last sort of stream of water was before they had to traverse this desert to get to Saladin. And they were having a council. They're like, should we traverse this? It was the heat. It was the middle of summer in the Middle East. It was stinking hot.
Right.
And then everyone was like, maybe we shouldn't do this. And to Raymond's credit, he was like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do this. It's just my wife. And he was sort of a voice for saying, let's just let him take Tiberias. We can go and get it later. And then what do you think Gerard of Rita 4 said?
Y'all are big babies.
Yeah, you guys are a bunch
Yeah.
of babies. You think like a hot desert's going to stop? What? You think being a little thirsty is going to stop the Templars? Heck
I imagine
no.
him having like a big red beard and a big red face.
Yeah. He's gonna,
Let's go.
He's going to have a big red face after this battle, that's for sure.
Okay.
And so he's like, no, we're doing this. And they were at their last, they had come to this place that they thought was going to be like a big stream and they could all replenish their supplies. But it was like a little trickle and barely their men could wet their throats. Like it was, and they're like, oh man, we don't have any water. We shouldn't do this. And then the Templar, Gerard was like, we're doing this. Let's do this thing. And he went to the king. He's like, are you are you king or are you a baby? And the king's like, I'm a king. And so
I like your version of this much better. Yeah, this is good.
And so then they're like, let's go. And everyone was, and lots of people were like, this is a bad idea. Anyway, as they were traversing the desert, as I mentioned last podcast, one of the little pages to the king looks up and he sees an eagle following them, holding a crossbow and 8 crossbow bolts. And that, or sorry, 7 crossbow bolts. That's hard to say.
Thank you for getting that right. Yeah.
Didn't we put him on the American flag? That eagle with the crossbow and the bolts?
Oh, he's got 3 on that one. But
Yeah, that was after he dropped a few.
yeah.
Exactly.
But
Tired eagle.
this page immediately realized that those bolts were the 7 deadly sins. Not quite sure how he figured that out because there's also 7 virtues, but whatever. But maybe because the eagle was screeching, "Woe to you, O Jerusalem," as it flew over the armies of Jerusalem.
So this is a thing that happened?
It's according to the page. Actually, apparently a lot of people saw it on this march. Now, they didn't have any water in the desert, so take that for what it's worth.
But if a lot of people saw the same hallucination,
Yeah.
that's pretty weird, you guys.
So the page came and he's like, "Hey, there's a bad omen. Okay. First of all, he's holding a crossbow. That's alarming.
Right.
What if he just lets one fly?"
I'm not saying it's alien.
Thank you. I was waiting for it. Thank you. Good. Thank you.
And Gerard was like, "No, it's a good omen. Let's keep going."
What's the omen? I don't.
Just the eagle's like,
Eagles will fight for us. They got crossbows.
That's what I'm
"Yeah,
saying.
we
Yeah,
got
seriously.
air support."
Good. Okay. Good.
Call in the eagles.
Eagles with
That's right.
crossbows.
The
Yeah.
eagles with
good.
crossbows.
Fly us out of
So-
Mordor.
Yeah.
But a lot of people took this as a bad sign that the birds were screaming, "Woe to you, Jerusalem." Anyway, and as they left their last water supply,
Was the bro king like, no, it's not like whoa as in sad whoa. It's like, whoa.
we made this
dude.
exact joke last time.
Did we really?
We did.
I'm sure we did.
I'm so sorry, listeners.
It's all right. It
I
just
apologize.
means you're authentically funny every time. Because like, no. Because the joke, like,
That's very kind.
you don't plan your jokes; it just comes to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're the same stinging joke.
And we forget what we say immediately after we say it. Yeah. Yeah. absolutely.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so they're going
Shame.
and they're in the desert and they're away from their water. And Saladin's like, "I can't believe they did that." And he immediately sends his 2 nephews with an army around the Templars riding in the desert to go to the other side and cut off their retreat to the nearest water supply.
Okay.
So now there's Saracens in front of you and Saracens behind you and no water anywhere. Anywhere you go, there are Saracens between you and water. Rough.
Yeah.
So they got real hot.
Yes.
And it was real dry and real dusty. And then they went and they camped. And because it was so hot and dry and dusty, they kicked up all this dirt. And then that's in your face. And they were camping so close to the Saracen army. And the Saracens had, like camels, and they had sacks full of water.
Water soaker or super soakers and stuff.
Exactly. And they were like, taunting.
Sprinklers are going
Yeah,
like
they
a
were
lawn.
taunting them at night. You could hear water being poured out on the ground and laughter, and everyone was like in the Christian camp. And they said that the Saracens were camping so close that any cat that was trying to escape the Christian army would have ran into a Saracen guard. So there you go.
Why did they have cats?
Just if they followed them. They have
is the
eagles,
thing.
They
apparently.
got creepy
sure,
omen
yeah.
eagles. So
Yeah.
Creepy omany cats. Yeah, good.
We are going to be talking about a pope who thinks cats are like Satan's minions, but we'll get there.
That pope would be correct.
Probably. Anyway, so they are now surrounded, and as they woke up, they're like, "Crap, we should just have a big throwdown tomorrow morning. We're going to fight them." And they went, "No, we shouldn't do this. We should march even further into the desert towards that mountain, which I'm pretty sure has water on it."
Okay.
oh no,
Seems like a
boys,
bad idea.
guys.
So they decide that
the
when
Saracens surely don't know
Yes.
where the water is.
So when they wake up in the morning, they decide that they're going to start marching towards that mountain, and I think it was called like Man, I can
Death Mountain.
Yeah. Mount Death,
Dry
yeah.
Mountain. No, it was called Hattin. I think it was the name of the mountain. Hattin. It ends up being called the Battle of Hattin. So
Means no streams.
yeah. So they start going to this mountain and even further into the desert. So what the Saracens do is they start all of the brush everywhere on fire, so it's like dry and smoky, and it kind of looked like you're in this dry hellscape.
So they're just pranking him hard.
Yes.
Seriously, yeah.
And the army of the Saracens were following the army of the Christians through the desert as they were going towards this mountain. And at some point they realized, all right, the Christians were like, we should just charge the Muslim army. And so they did.
Because at a certain point, it's just going to get worse for you.
It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So they decided to charge the Muslim army, and then the Muslim army broke and separated, and the horses charged right through, but it was on purpose. They broke on purpose, and then as soon as the horses broke into the Muslim army, they actually weren't retreating. They enveloped them, and all of the bros who did the big manly charge were captured. So, and killed. So they did this big, like we're going to do this thing. And they rode, and then the Saracens pretended to be like, oh no, and then started to run. And so then the horses got even further and further and further away from their army. Right. And then they got surrounded and slaughtered. So these things happen. So
just brush it off so easily.
I know.
Yeah,
and so then all
wow.
of the sort of the bravest Templars were on the mounted Templars were on, were captured or killed. And so then King Guy was like, "Crap! I'm gonna put up my tent, and I'm gonna take out I'm gonna take out the relic of the Holy Cross, and we're gonna fight to the death because they had no food. They were super thirsty. People were already starting to die from thirst. And King Guy and his knights of the Templar made a final stand, and they raised the cross, the shard of the true cross high, and Saladin rode into battle against them, and Saladin said, I will not consider this. Everyone was like, all his little nephews and uncles were like, hey man, we're going to win this thing. He's like, we have not won this thing until that tent falls and that Templar flag hits the ground. And the flag of the King of Jerusalem hits the ground. And they fought, and then the tent fell, and the Christian flag hit the dust. And at the end of the battle, Saladin and his men claimed to have killed 40,000 people.
Wow, man!
At the Battle of Hattin, or however you pronounce it.
Was the king killed?
The king was not killed. The king was taken. So the king Raymond and what's his face? King Guy and Raymond and Gerard were all still alive. Oh shoot, I can't remember. Gerard, yeah, he survives because he dies somewhere else. And they were all taken before the king, or before Saladin. And Saladin, the first thing he did was he gave King Guy a cup of rose water to drink.
Aw.
Yeah, so he's like, you're probably super thirsty.
Yeah.
And the king took it, and he passed the cup of rose water to Raymond. And as Raymond was about to drink, Saladin said, I didn't give you rose water, and smacked it out of his hand. And so Raymond didn't get any water, and Gerard definitely didn't get any water.
Saladin sounds like such a baller.
Saladin's awesome.
Everything I've heard about Saladin makes me think this guy's just rad.
So a couple of notes before we continue on with what happens to Raymond. So nobody knows what happens to the True Cross at the end of this battle.
Yeah.
Some people say that Saladin took it. There's one dude who many years later who escaped, a Templar who escaped the battle and then sort of shows up in a town like 10 years later. And he was like, I escaped the Battle of Hattin. And I had the True Cross. And they say, hey man, what'd you do with it? And he's like, I buried it somewhere and I can't remember. And he
That's a bummer.
Yeah. So he buries a chunk of the True Cross and he can't remember where it is. So it's like in the desert somewhere. Other people have all these other little stories about what happened to it, but it disappears. No one really knows what happened to to the True Cross of the Templars. It's gone. But luckily,
Do we have any more chunks of the True Cross?
Yeah. There's more chunks of the True Cross than there probably was a cross.
Than there is cross. Yeah.
They're everywhere.
They're that many? Right?
Like if you took all the chunks of the true cross and like built a cross out of it, it'd probably be taller than our school.
I think they do the same thing with saints and like all kinds of those relics were like, yeah,
Pig's bones and stuff.
Pig's bones and other bones
Yeah.
and just chunks of wood.
But this one was apparently the most credible one for it to be the true cross. But it gets lost. No one really knows what happened to it. And one guy shows up at Acre like years later. He's like, I buried it. I can't find it. I'm sorry. Which is really funny. Anyway, so Guy gets the rose water and is treated well and hospitably. And Raymond's like about to take a sip and smack. No rose water for you. Saladin doesn't like Raymond, even though Raymond earlier had like allied with Saladin after the whole Guy becoming king dispute that you can hear about in the last podcast. But Saladin was hated Raymond from some old wars and battles that had happened before. And so he decides he's going to behead him. And Saladin wants to swing the sword himself. But the legend goes that Saladin was so excited and so happy that he finally got the chance to kill Raymond that as he raised the sword and lowered it, he missed and cut off his arm by mistake.
Oh, wow. What? That's what?
Yeah. And so Raymond got his arm cut off and was...
Raymond is the head of the Templar, right?
No, Raymond is the head of Tripoli. Gerard is the head of Templars.
Okay.
But Raymond, it was his wife that they were going to Tiberius to save.
Got it.
Right.
But anyway, so Saladin was so excited to finally kill Raymond that he was going to chop his head off, but missed and chopped off his arm instead. And Raymond's like, "Ah, man, come on, do it proper."
Right.
And then Saladin then chops his head off.
Oh, bummer. Oh,
But it's just pretty funny that Saladin was just so jacked up to finally get his revenge that he missed.
yeah.
Aw,
Poor Raymond. That
I know,
sucks.
seriously.
that's a rough
But
way to go.
I think all of the Templars except Gerard and like 10 dudes were killed. The whole army of Jerusalem was destroyed, and Saladin promptly goes and conquers Tiberias, Acre, Sidon, Beirut, and then Jerusalem.
Wow.
He takes over Jerusalem. So the city has fallen. Almost everything has fallen. The only things that are left in the hands of the Crusader states are some places in the north, like Tripoli and Antioch, I think, and a lot of these castles that the Templars had. But all the major cities, and Acre being the big one because that's the port city, were taken. Now, if you remember from other podcasts that King Richard I comes to the Holy Land, fights Saladin, and retakes Acre. But Saladin takes it. He doesn't hold it for very long, but he takes Jerusalem. He goes and clears out the Al-Aqsa Mosque with rose water and kicks all the Templars out and takes all the crosses out and puts back all the Muslim relics in there and turns it back into a mosque. And that was the Battle of Hattin was the probably the turning point for all the Crusader states. It was definitely their biggest loss, and I think it was like the height of power. And now it's gone. They'll get Jerusalem back in like 100 years or so, but they won't hold anything for nearly as long as they did now. So Richard, you can hear the story about Richard coming in. So Richard comes and takes Acre, and then he has the opportunity to take Jerusalem, but he negotiates a 2-year peace with Saladin. And the one big concession is they allow pilgrims to go and worship at the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre, but Jerusalem is still under Muslim control. And so Richard's like, I can live with that, and he goes back to England.
Right.
And then, so then this happens. Gerard dies in some battle. I can't remember how, but it's sort of like this. Again, it was like in true bro fashion. It was like an ill-advised charge, but at this point, like his luck ran out and he was killed. Anyway,
Yeah.
So there you go, Gerard. But eventually, and if you guys remember, Saladin had a bunch of kids, but he also had those awesome personal guards. Remember those personal guards?
Yes.
They wore yellow, right?
Yeah, they wore yellow silk, and they were the Mamluks.
Man,
This is
Saladin's so cool.
Yeah,
I know.
hold on to those Mamluks because they become a huge part of the story later.
Okay.
So he starts his empire, his dynasty, the Abbasid dynasty. I can't remember what it was called, but he sets up the dynasty, and then when he dies, it gets disseminated to his children, and almost immediately falls into squabbles and
come on,
disputes
guys.
and these kinds of things. So nobody could really hold these states together quite like the dad could. And so then you get these sort of power back and forths, and no one can really sort of keep a united united Muslim sort of caliphate all through the Middle East and Syria, up through Turkey and Syria and Baghdad and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and they just couldn't. Yeah, it was too hard to do The kids just weren't skilled enough. And the Templars are essentially falling into disrepair. They really kind of, at this period, pull back from the military side of things and really emphasize the financial side of things. So if you remember, they had special dispensations from the church that they could not have to pay tithes.
Right.
And they could collect money like churches could. And it meant that they actually ended up becoming this huge, important banking network. If a letter from a Templar in Portugal was good for a Templar in Cyprus. And so if you gave a Templar a bag of gold, 100 gold marks in Portugal, and he gave you a letter saying 100 gold marks, you could take that letter to the other side of the world, give it to the Templars in Cyprus, and they would give you 100 gold marks.
Cool.
So they ended up becoming this really, and they take a little bit off the top for their services.
Naturally.
So they ended up becoming
Those
this
hidden
really
fees, man. That's what gets you.
Yeah.
efficient, like proto-banking power. Before we had banking like we know in the Italian Renaissance, they were the money holders. And as they went on, people became in debt to the Templars. England was in debt to them. France becomes enormously in debt to the Templars. And the Templars also were acquiring huge, vast estates in the Christian nations. Huge tracts of land in France, in Spain, in England, a lot of the north. The Templars were becoming wildly rich, and they were also the gave the world much needed liquidity. If you wanted,
Right.
you didn't have to take all your gold in your boat, and then if your boat sank, all your gold's gone. You could just take the letter, and the letter was good enough. So, and then let's see. So eventually, then a new crusade happened. Oh man, we're skipping so many great stories. Like in the Third Crusade, there was this guy named Frederick. He was the king of. He was the Holy Roman Emperor, and he was going to go on crusade, but he was known as Frederick Barbarossa. But on the crusade, he decides he's going to stop and take a swim because it was real hot just on one of his marches, and he drowns.
Oh,
and the Holy Roman Emperor drowns swimming.
Got to
And
take
then-
off your chainmail.
I know,
seriously.
yes.
Lesson
honestly.
1. Yeah.
So because he didn't go, Richard got all the glory anyway. But in 1204, the Fourth Crusade happens. And it was again like crusading fervor got all whipped up. All right, let's go get Jerusalem back. And off the Crusaders went, and halfway there, I don't really know why, but for some reason they're like, you know who also should be taught a lesson? Those Eastern Greek Christians.
Oh.
And then they sacked Constantinople
Whoa.
in 1204.
That's bad.
They burned down a bunch of like Christian churches and plundered the city of Constantinople. And they're like, ha, shows them. And this was the beginning.
Would this later become Istanbul?
Yes, Constantinople. Yeah, Istanbul,
Okay.
Constantinople. Istanbul is Constantinople.
So if you have a date
Yeah.
in Constantinople should be waiting in Istanbul?
Yeah.
Yep.
What is
This is a song.
Oh, sorry. I don't-
Istanbul was Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. You have a date in Constantinople should be waiting in Istanbul.
Hey. No.
They were giants. They might
They
be
might
giants.
be giants.
They might be giants. Anyway, so they sacked Constantinople, and this is the beginning of the Great Schism between the Eastern Church and the Western Church. And that Great Schism was only recently, like, knit back together in our lifetime.
Yep. I don't remember when, but
But was it Pope Benedict and the Patriarch of Antioch got together? I don't know.
sounds right.
Yeah.
Yep.
But anyway, so that was bad. And then the Fourth Crusade did not go very well. But something really interesting happened. Not just bros, real brothers.
Okay.
Two brothers became the head of the Templars and the head of the Hospitallers.
Oh, there you go.
So you have these two brothers, and they're in charge of these two military orders. And they decide that what they're going to do is they're going to go to try to take over the big, important port city of Damietta. I actually don't know how to pronounce that name of that city. It's in the north of Egypt. And they go, and they're successful. And they actually take the city. And nobody thought that they could. And there was this really cool battle where they were on an island. Like the city was kind of a port city that was an island in a delta. And they were on this little tiny island, and they assaulted the city and took it over. And everyone was shocked, including the Templars and the Hospitallers. Like, holy crap, we did it. And the head of the Muslim Empire was like, wow, cool. Hey, I'll make you a deal. If you give us Damietta back, we'll give you Jerusalem.
Wow.
And they debated this. And
Sounds like a deal.
as they were debating this, a certain monk from Italy decided he was going to come down and try to convert the Muslims not with the sword, but with words. And you know who that monk was, Thomas?
Would you don't,
Freudian slip?
I did Freudian slip.
Was it Franco?
That's
James?
James Franco.
Yes.
Saint Francis.
It was St. Francis.
The man himself.
So Francis comes down and he tries to convert the Muslims by talking to them. Let's see if I can actually find the little section in this book where it talks about it. And
It's one of those insane things. Like he should have been killed for.
He should have been killed.
Yeah. And instead, he gets in. He actually gets an appointment with the Sultan. I don't
Yes.
know if
the Al-Kamil is the
Yeah.
name of the head of the Saracens at this time. And this is what Dan Jones talks about with Francis coming down to Damietta at this time.
Yep.
Upon arrival at Damietta, Francis put himself forward as a negotiator. He walked out of the Christian camp and presented himself to the nearby Egyptian army. There he demanded to see Al-Kamil so that the new sultan could be shown the error of his faith. According to James...
Did he lay that on the guards? He's like, look, I got to talk to your boss so I can tell
But
him
he's
how
like
wrong
a
he is.
dude wearing like a bag
Right.
and like no sandals.
Right.
And they're like, well, he's not...
What's he gonna do?
He's probably not
threat.
an assassin. So.
Yeah.
According to James of Vitry, the chronicler and bishop of Acre, Francis, quote, preached to the Saracens for a few days, but with little result.
Yeah.
The Sultan politely refused his offer to perform a miraculous walk through the fire as proof of God's favor and sent the eccentric young man back to his own side. Only Al-Kamil's good humor saved Francis from summary beheading, a fate many Templar brothers had met with over the years.
Yeah.
So Francis goes and he's like, I'm just going to talk to him. I'm just going to tell him about Jesus. And then if that's not going to convince him, I'll be like, how about I miraculously walk through the fire?
Exactly, yeah.
And Al-Kamil's like, no, thank you. And then he went back.
I've seen it.
I'm good. And so that didn't work.
Yeah.
And so while this was happening, the two brothers, head of the Templar, head of the Hospitallers, were like, hey, man, should we just take Jerusalem and give him back Damietta? And the more headstrong said, we could, or we could push further south into Egypt with our armies. And they're like, yes, let's do that. So they said, heck no, we're not going to get Jerusalem. We're going to take all of Egypt, then go take Jerusalem. And Al-Kamil was like, fine. And so he retreated his armies deeper into Egypt, down the Nile. And the Templars and the Hospitallers took their troops down, realized pretty quickly they don't know anything about the Nile, run out of food, and are absolutely routed, and are trying to go back to Damietta, only to find that Damietta is now besieged, they can't get in, and they're on the outside, and they're running out of food, and they're starving to death. And they surrender to Al-Kamil. And they're like, okay,
We'll take your
we'll
deal.
take
now.
your
Yeah,
deal. We'll take
exactly.
Jerusalem. And he said, interesting,
Is that still on the
deal
table?
has changed a little bit.
Yeah.
I will give you 15 days worth of food and get out of my country.
Oof.
And they took the deal.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I feel like that's a pretty good deal
Yeah.
considering
So-
where they were.
Yeah.
We're starving to death. Can we still have Jerusalem? I feel like 15 days of food is...
So they turned
nice.
an offer of the holiest city of Jerusalem for 15 days of bread because they were stupid. So they take their food and they go back and they go home with their tails between their legs. Where was I? Oh, yes. So, this is just sort of typifying that the Templars were, full of spirit, but not too bright.
Yeah.
And at this point, then the whole Christian world was looking to the Holy Roman Emperor to get his act together. Different guy, not the guy who drowned. The Holy Roman Emperor to get his act together and come and have a crusade in the Holy Land. The Pope really wanted him to do it. His name was Frederick II of House Hohenstaufen. Hohenstaufen.
What in the world? Okay.
So Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor of House Hohenstaufen, was rumored to be someone who privately disbelieved all faiths. And he thought all religion. This was rumor that he thought that all religion was quite silly. But the Pope didn't like this.
Right.
And the Pope at this time was a very pious Pope whose name I can't remember, but was...
Could it be Pope Pius?
He wasn't pious.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was a Pope who thought that there were heretics everywhere. He was super concerned that the Holy Roman Emperor was a heretic, and he was also the Pope that thought cats were a tool of the devil.
Yeah.
And there were many famous heresy trials where cats were put on trial and asked if they were in fact devils.
What'd they say?
Yeah.
Meow. And there were many cats that were burnt because they were assumed to be devils. Yeah.
History is crazy.
I don't like cats, but that seems
extreme.
Too much. Yeah.
Right. Are you a devil?
So
Burn him.
Proves it.
So it's repressed. So Frederick II, Frederick II of Hohenstaufen finally came, basically get the Pope off his back to start this crusade. And when he got there, he immediately clashed with the Templars. The Templars did not like him. He did not like the Templars.
Right.
And he's like, Templars, I want you to do what I tell you. I'm the Holy Roman Emperor. And they're like, we don't have to listen to you. This is our town. This is our lost territory. Right. and so he's like, fine. And he started his own order of holy warriors called the Teutonics. And so the Teutonic Knights...
Wasn't there a barbershop quartet?
Thank you. Yeah.
Is that the joke you're going to make?
Yes, we've also made this joke before.
Gosh dang it.
Sorry.
Would you guys at least warn me so I don't make the same
I was about
joke?
to say something and then you just went... Anyway, so here we are.
You can see the little glint in your eye.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway.
I just get excited.
We can make the same joke. I'm a huge fan of their a cappella work. Come on, say it.
So the Teutons came on board, and the Teutons wore...
So disappointed in myself.
The Teutonics wore all black with a white cross. The Hospitallers wore all blue with a white cross, and then the Templars wore all white with the red cross. So he sort of even stole their uniform.
Okay, great.
And so they come, and they were loyal to him, and the Templars were like, who are these guys? And they were Germans, mainly, Holy Roman Empire, whereas most of the Templars were French. And then most of the Hospitallers were more like Greek and Cyprians and that kind of thing. And so now you've got this sort of regional clashes between them. And so the King of Jerusalem and Templars did not like Frederick II. Frederick II had a couple of battles, but as he was there, he thought that the Holy Land was stupid, and he thought crusades were stupid, and he thought that all of this bloodshed for this piece of land that had nothing to do with Germany was stupid. And he eventually decides that he's like, crusading, he was like, the crusades are dumb. And he left. And as he was getting on his boat to leave to go out of Acre, all the townsfolk came. They're like, "You suck! We hate you!" and threw guts at him. And so he left with pelted with animal guts. And he was like, "Oh, I hate the Crusades," and went back to Germany.
I guess right.
Worst vacation ever.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds horrible.
And Islam, the Muslims at that point, they were just too strong. The Christians were whittled down, and there was crusading fervor back home was getting less and less, and no one was really into this anymore. And if the Holy Roman Emperor is like, this is kind of stupid, let's go take care of things back in Germany. Who cares about what's happening out here?
Right.
And people were kind of like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. We're going to skip over some other stories. There's a story of the King Louis the Ninth, and he was the king of France, and he was real young, and he was dying. He was on his deathbed, and everyone sort of came into his room, and he looked super dead, and his sisters were like, I think he's dead. And then they were putting the sheet over his head because he was dead, and then he wakes up, he's like, I'm not dead. And he's like, bring me a priest. And they brought him a priest, and he's like, priest, I want you to know that if I don't die, I'm going to go on crusade. And the priest is like, okay, and blessed him. And then he was fine. And then he recovered. Yep. So then Louis IX had in his mind that, okay, I'm going to go on a crusade. He goes off, and he attacks Damietta again with the Templars and the Hospitallers and some of the Teutonics that stayed behind. No, I just think they're singing.
Okay, thank you. Good, thank you. Good.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my. And they go and they attack Damietta, and then it's a huge flop, and everyone gets beaten by the Muslims, and Louis IX gets captured, and now he's captured, and then France has got to pay this huge ransom, and they do pay it, and he goes home, and he says, I'm not going on crusades anymore. War is stupid. And he dedicates himself to a life of sainthood and piety. And he actually becomes a saint.
Oh,
he's one of the saints of the Catholic Church.
Cool.
Louis IX.
I mean, he fulfilled his promise.
Yeah.
He went.
He did.
And he didn't know it at the time, but he was the last Crusader king. Nobody else was going to go on crusades after the Louis IX.
Wow.
The fervor was gone. And this pope, whose name I can't remember, was sort of turning the sort of pious eye away from the Middle East and back home to looking for if heretics back home. And there was a new organizing principle in the Crusader states the Mamluks. Remember them?
Yeah.
They were the royal guard. They were just dudes. They were just the guards, and they were the slaves that were turned into an army. They took over, and they're in charge. In fact, the Mamluks ended Saladin's dynasty, and they started the Mamluk dynasty. And so the guards then became, they took over, and they united the Muslim world.
I love these guys.
And they united the Muslim world against a new dangerous foe in the north.
The
Mongolians, who had the largest land empire in human history, stretching from China to Poland to the Arctic.
It's crazy.
Dang.
Yeah. Genghis Khan was
But the Arctic didn't put up much of a fight.
They didn't. Yeah. Not too much of a fight.
You hear this, you bears?
Yeah.
We're here.
So Genghis Khan was a little orphan boy and then somehow rose to prominence and became the Mongol king. We won't talk too much about him because I don't know anything about him.
That sounds like a future podcast. I am super interested in him.
Yeah.
I want to learn all about Genghis Khan.
So,
Dan Carlin hardcore history, he has like a 16-hour thing on the
really?
rise of Genghis Khan. Yeah.
Cool. Really?
So anyway,
oh, man.
so just
this
go
is
listen
a
to
promise
that.
to you listeners. After Plato,
That's what you're going to do?
Genghis Khan.
Okay, there it is.
Awesome.
Okay.
So Genghis Khan becomes king, and he then comes down, and he's going to take over the Crusader states. The Crusaders at this point are like toothless. It really is the Mamluks, and like the Crusader states are like flies buzzing around, and the Templars have like a couple of castles and Cyprus. But the Mamluks are more concerned with the Mongolians, so they have to fight them. Genghis Khan dies in 1259. He splits his empire up with his kids, who are less competent than he is, but there's a big old giant fight, and he is an existential threat to all Muslims and Christians in the region. And at one point, the Mongolians sack Baghdad, which is like the pretty much the spiritual center of this caliphate. He sacks Baghdad, he takes the caliph, and the way that he killed the caliph was he rolled him up in a carpet and had his horses run back and forth over that carpet. That sucks.
Yeah, seriously.
And unfortunately, he also burned down the library of Baghdad in 1258.
Oh, bro.
So there's all sorts of things in that. Who knows what was in that library in Baghdad in 1258, but the Mongolians burned it down.
Plato's comedies.
Probably. Yeah, probably. Aristotle's, book 4 of whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so burns it down, and so the Mamluks and the Mongolians are fighting for an existential threat, and really what kind of stopped the Mongolians from taking over everything was the plague, and that took sort of the wind out of their sails. That the bubonic plague.
Turns out no one wants to go to war when you've got goiters the size of like water balloons.
Exactly.
It's a bad day.
But now the crusading fervor, like I said, had been waning. No one really wanted to put all their money into taking land that they don't have anymore, and they kept losing castles. And now the Templars are really just kind of like hanging on Cyprus, rich as kings, and everybody is in debt to them. So
they develop a lot of enemies.
yes.
Yeah.
So the church now is like, all right, we want you Templars. We want you to amalgamate the Templars, the Teutonics, and the Hospitallers. We want you guys to become one order, and we want you to submit to the church. And the Templars were like, no, thank you. No, we don't want to do that. No, thanks. And this was a big, old, ongoing back and forth. And right now, the Grand Master of the Templars is a man by the name of James of Molay. So James of Molay is a Grand Master, and he's a young guy, and the Pope is like, hey, we want you to amalgamate, and he's like, don't want to do that. And this, you had the Pope at the time there's sort of two men we now need to, there's going to be three, but two guys we need to know. Pope Boniface VIII and the King of France, Philip IV. Philip IV was a difficult man. What can we say about Philip IV? He very much presented himself as zealous, but his zeal was for the church insofar as the church meant France. So he was very zealous for the faith and liked to paint everything as existential spiritual threats, but really they were very political threats. And Boniface VIII did not like Philip IV. And there's like Italian-French rivalries going on, and Boniface VIII, hated Philip IV, and they had all of these sort of disputes, and Philip IV was like, hey, Boniface, or hey, everybody, I'm pretty sure Boniface the Eighth is too rich for his own good. The church shouldn't be rich. Look at all that money he's got. And I'm pretty sure he's like into sinful stuff. And Boniface is like, you take that back.
Yeah.
Eventually, Boniface dies, and now there's this huge succession. There was like, okay, who's going to be the next pope? And there was a lot of French cardinals who were basically in the back pocket of Philip IV, and then there was a lot of Italian cardinals who were in the back pocket of the Holy Roman Empire. And it was going to be this huge political throwdown, and they couldn't really pick a pope. So they went and they did what they always do when they can't pick a pope. They find a dude, they find a hermit, and they find a righteous hermit.
And make them do it. Yeah.
So they found this guy, his name was Peter, and he was a hermit. And they're like, hey, Peter, you're Pope. You are now Pope Celestine V.
Wow.
And he was like, I don't want to be Pope. And you're like, no, sorry, man, you're Pope. And they like forcefully poped him.
Wow.
And he was Pope for like 3 months. And he ran away, and no one knows what happened to him.
No way.
Yeah, Celestine V ran away and abdicated his pontificate and like went back into hermit life, and they couldn't find him.
I love this guy too. That sounds great. I'm imagining something like he was dirty and he never showered,
Exactly.
and he's got sandals, and he tried to fight that big silly hat off when they tried to put it on his head.
He probably just like came to Rome on like a little pilgrimage one day, and oh gosh darn it, I'm Pope.
Whoops.
Whoopsie doodle.
Whoops, yeah.
Anyway, so then he runs off, and they can't
told
find him.
Mom, have I got a tale for you?
So he goes back to his hermitage off in the mountains, and no one knows where he is. And so the Pope is gone,
Right.
and they said he abdicated, so we didn't need a Pope again. And at this point, Philip IV has enough political clout to get his dude in as the Pope. And his dude is named Pope Clement V. And he is essentially a lackey. He is in Philip IV's back pocket. So Clement V is Pope, and he is a French Pope. And the Italians and the Germans are like, I don't like this guy.
Right.
Anyway, so the Italians are ticked, and at one point, Clement V is like, spending way too much time in France, way too much time in Avignon, and he decides he's going to come back to Rome because he's got to do like Pope Rome stuff, and they don't let him back in. And he doesn't get back into Rome, and so he's like, you know what? The pontificate no longer lives in Rome. The pontificate now lives in France.
Oh.
And he went and he set up the head of the Roman Catholic Church in Avignon. And at some point, the Italians were like, you're not Pope anymore, and they had their own Pope, and this is known in history as the Babylonian captivity. That's what it's called. So we have there's going to be two popes, Clement V and some other dude in Rome, and it's this whole big to-do, and it's, but meanwhile, the Templars are rich,
Right.
and Philip IV is in massive debt to them.
Right.
And so he says, Clement, I want you to announce that the Templars are in fact heretics.
Oh.
Clement's like, do you have any like proof of this? And he's like, yeah. They're, they do like Satan.
Hang out with cats.
They do like Satan stuff in their
Really?
rituals.
He said
Yeah,
that? Well,
he's like
okay.
they don't. I'm pretty sure they step on crosses to become a Templar. And there's also and he made accusations of buggery, which is
Right.
because they weren't married and they all lived together, and so he's like, that's bound to happen.
Right.
And then some dudes who were like low-ranked Templars, the king would sit them down and he's like, hey, the Templars do anything weird? And they told him all these elaborate stories. One very funny story is one low-ranking Templar said, yes, if you want to be a Templar, in order to become a Templar, you have to kiss the naked buttocks of the Grand Master. And Philip IV was like, that's all I need. And so he took that to the Pope, and he's like, they're kissing each other's butts. They're stepping on the cross. They're doing weird Satan stuff. These guys are bad news. So the Pope's like, all right, does this have anything to do with the fact that they're
You owe
super in
them.
debt
Yeah,
to the, and
yeah.
he's like, no, they're bad.
No, butt kissing.
And so meanwhile, there's all sorts of heresy things. People were being super freaked out about heretics.
Right.
There were the Fraticellis going on. There was all sorts of these little groups popping up who were really upset about how rich the church was. This is the
Right.
pre-Reformation. This is like the beginning of these tectonic plate movements that's going to come up in the Reformation, a lot of reform movements going on, a lot of people questioning the sort of political and temporal power of the church, and everyone was sort of like, holy crap, it's a paradigm shift. And so Philip IV is like, they're kissing each other's butts, we gotta, this is bad.
Right.
So Clement IV puts out an edict saying that all Templars are heretics, and on October 13th, 1307, so Friday, and it was a Friday, October 13th, 1307, all of the French armies seized every single piece of Templar land, gave it to the king, and rounded up and jailed every single Templar knight.
Is that why we have weird traditions about Friday the 13th?
That is why we have weird traditions about Friday the 13th.
No way. Friday the 13th because of Templars.
Because the Templars.
What?
They were all arrested, and then the Templars in other countries where people were less in debt and really liked the Templars didn't want to do it. The English were like, we kind of like the Templars. And like the Portuguese were like, we need them. And the Portuguese and Spanish, we need them. And the Pope was like, nah, you got to arrest them. And so you got to put them on trial, and you got to try them as heretics. So like half-hearted trials happen in England where it's like, are you a heretic? And they'd be like, or did you have to kiss butts and step on the cross in order to be a Templar? And they'd be like, no. And they'd say, well, we still think you are. And actually, there's a really interesting, this is a segue or a little tidbit. But there's this really interesting back and forth between the two different legal traditions of England and France. England at the time required juries. You needed witnesses who have seen the butt kissing and the cross stepping before for somebody to be tried. But in France, they would go off of testimony. And testimony usually under duress. So get a Templar, torture him for a little bit,
right.
And he's like, yeah, we kissed butts and stepped on crosses and did all sorts of things, and I
hang out with cats
and sacrifice babies to Satan and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right, well, this is slam dunk. And so the courts in France really gravitated towards these testimonies, whereas there was this illegal tradition in England about juries, and so it meant that it was just an interesting thing to look into the history of what constituted proof in the court of law. And in England, so they were these half-hearted trials, and Templars weren't killed, but in France, and Philip IV, of course, was ticked at them.
Right.
So he had all these Templars, and they all went on trial, and it was basically a lot of these things were show trials. A lot of the common people were like, I don't buy this show trial at all. And James of Molay's whole life was like in prison and trying to convince people that he wasn't a heretic. But Philip IV, if you crossed Philip IV, he would do nothing. He would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. He actually dug up remember he had the fight with Boniface? He actually dug up his bones and put his bones on trial for heresy. Found him guilty. And then they threw his bones in a field.
That's messed up.
So he was like, gotcha. So to Boniface, the eighth, he was put on posthumously put on trial for heresy and lost that trial.
Who could have seen that coming?
Yeah.
And
seriously.
anyway, this tells you a little bit about what Philip IV was like. Anyway, James of Molay, it was unclear whether or not no one really knew how serious they were going to go. So some Templars were like, yeah, fine, we did these things, and yes, we didn't like the church, and we were kind of our own church, and there were stories of Templars who would sleep, have sex with other Templars, these things did happen. So they were like, yeah, I heard about that kind of thing happening, and then Philip IV was like, oh my goodness, and so these trials were all misinformation, muddled weirdness, and at one point, James of Molay said, no, we are not heretics. This is ridiculous. We've never done any of this stuff. I'm the head of the order, and this is a show trial, and we are not heretics.
So then they're like, so says the guy with smooches on his
Yeah, exactly.
buns.
He's like, you're the guy that's getting this butt kiss, so of course you're going to say that.
Yeah.
And so then they gave James one last time to confess and to repent, and he said, nope, not doing it. So they took him to the steps of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. They tied him to the stake, and they said, all right, man, are you going to confess? And he said, no. And they were like, all right, well, we're going to burn you alive. And he said, fine, do it. I'm going to see if I can find the actual quote that he said before he died, because it's very famous because James of Molay curses not only Pope Clement V, but he also curses Philip IV. Can't find the quote, but so he says this whole thing, and he says, "God will avenge our death." And everybody sort of took this to mean that the Clement V and Philip IV were cursed by this holy man who shouldn't have been killed, and these heresy things didn't happen. And he was held up as this model of, everyone was like, no, he's not a heretic. This is a political thing. People were ticked.
Is it from this your heinous judgment to the living and true God who is in heaven, warning the Pope that within a year and a day he and Philip IV would be obliged to answer for their crimes in God's presence?
That's right. He said in 1 year.
He even gave it a date.
He gave it a date. He said in a year and a day.
Moxie on that guy.
Yeah, seriously.
1 month later, Clement IV was dead.
What?
He got lupus and died.
Wow.
A month
Wowzers.
later, 8 months later, Philip IV died in a hunting accident.
No.
Fell off his horse, died.
You know who controls horses? God.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, good.
So everyone was like, "Holy crap! The Templars, did it."
Yeah.
Flipping wizards.
Yeah, they're
Right.
wizards. So maybe they are in league with the devil. Anyway, so this whole thing happened, and everyone sort of saw that as justice. And this is kind of what started the whole Templars are pulling the strings.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And not all the Templars were killed. All the British Templars were like, don't do that anymore. Don't,
No,
worship.
if we see you kiss one butt.
Yes, exactly. If you do
we
any
will
of
be
that
so
stuff,
mad with you.
If you sacrifice one more goat to Satan, all these
Stepping on crosses.
stepping
No more
on
cats
crosses,
for you
don't
guys.
do any of this stuff.
Yeah.
So the British Templars got they weren't routed and killed, and the ones in Spain less so. And then in the 17th and 18th century, there was this revival of secret societies, and that's when the Masons came on the scene, and they took. They said that they were the Templars reimagined, and were called the Masons because the Templars apparently built secret tunnels underneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem when they were in control of the Temple Mount. And so throughout history, you get all these stories of the Templars, and they go underground, and they still had this money, and blah, 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 blah. But,
It's weird.
but they went from bodyguards to the pilgrims in the Middle East in the year 1118 or whatever it is, to being absolutely wiped out in one day on October 13th, 1307. So they only exist for 300 years or so, and they were this big experiment of violence and money and zeal, and taking what was working in the Christian world of the monastic tradition, marrying it to a practical temporal need, violence, and trying to make a new Christian expression out of it. And I'm comforted that it
failed.
dies out
Yeah,
in a couple,
exactly.
in 10 generations or whatever, not even. So, I mean, it's definitely not a good period of time for the church.
Right.
The whole trials of heresy are not a good period of time for the church. That is, so the Templars kind of fade into history. And as the crusading states, as they poof into non-existence, all the fervor is no longer. There's the idea of Christendom is starting to fade, and the idea of nations are starting to rise. Right? Remember with Clement IV or Clement V, this was a fight between the French Pope and the Italian Pope, and then the German Holy Emperor. You have this idea of people groups as opposed to just Christendom, which you had more back in the early Middle Ages when the Crusades sort of started. So. That's the end of the Templars. I mean, that was a pretty Hail Mary call to do, you're going to die in a year, and both of them do die.
And it worked. Yeah,
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So, that's the Templars. I don't know if you had any. That's sort of the end of the story. I don't know if you have any final thoughts or if
Where did all that money go?
probably back to the crown, the French crown.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the French were indebted to them, then it means they had the money in the first place, and that debt was just erased. So
Exactly.
there
And
was no real
all those
money.
lands were taken back.
Yeah,
and,
all the land was taken back, and
and then those orders were squished. But then you still had the Teutons. The Teutonic order still existed, and the Hospitallers. The Hospitallers were like, all right, well, we're just going to go back to doing hospitals.
they just sort of like changed their logo.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
no
But it
butt
worked.
kissing here.
Yeah,
Just,
no, exactly. And
But it worked, right? Because
yeah.
it's still around.
But there are now, we're sort of making light of it, but there were credible sources saying that, outside the realms of normal Christian orthodoxy was happening in the Templar. No one really knew what was happening. People were coming out and saying that crazy things were happening. We don't really know because all of this stuff was secret. So we don't really know if there was actually some sort of
like walking on crosses and
yeah. And apparently you had to like denounce Christ and swear your allegiance to the Templars themselves, which may be credible. We just don't really.
But it was started as a group
Holy
of people,
order.
to bring you to a pilgrimage site. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I know, but
it
as
seems
they
like those stories are cooked
but
up
as they
to me.
got to be seen to be in opposition to the Catholic Church, maybe at some point you had to denounce Catholicism, and
maybe that's it,
And
yeah.
so maybe that was getting twisted into you're not denouncing Christ, but you're denouncing Christ's vicar, the Pope, and you're swearing your allegiance to the So who knows? There could possibly be those kinds of things. Especially this is the era of questioning church authority, so it's very quite possible that they had traditions that were really getting people to. And there's also that if you make people complicit in crimes, and then you're going to have a tighter power grip on them, right? Like if you make them do something like denounce the church, you
can
now
always
have them.
out them as a
exactly.
church
you could
denouncer.
always out them and say, hey, they denounced the church.
Yeah.
So you now have them in your pocket. So there's probably maybe something like that going on.
I mean, that's a common practice now in Scientology, right? One of the things they do is ask you all about your life so that they have blackmail stuff for you later.
Bummer.
And you see this in like dictators. To get people under their thumb, when a dictator comes to power, he kills all the old opposition. Well, you get the people who are on the fence to do the killing, and now they're in your back pocket, right?
Right.
So maybe there was something going like that with the Templars, but it is a unattractive piece of history, and why they are romanticized, I don't really know. I mean, there's maybe some gallantry, but my reading of it is just imbeciles and just bad management of resources, and of course Girard's stupid military ideas of like who needs water, right? So
Armies don't run on water.
Yeah.
we run on spirit.
yeah. So anyway,
Great.
that's the Templars.
That's cool.
Interesting, man. I'm super interested in Saladin especially, and can't wait to learn about the Mongols.
Yeah, Saladin. The more I read about him, the more I just find him to be just one of those fascinating leaders of history.
And he sent letters back and forth with Richard, didn't
Yep,
he? Like
they became
were
they were very
buddy pals.
cordial.
Yeah.
How did he die? Did you say?
Old age.
Really? That was it?
Really?
No.
A conqueror like that, and he died of old age, not assassination or anything. That's impressive.
And not in battle. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
That's awesome.
That was really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that, Graham. This has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. You can email us at classicalstuff@veritasacademy.net. You can find us on Twitter at Classical Stuff, CLSSCAL Stuff. We are online at classicalstuff.net. And just because we brought it up, the erasing of the mutual anathemas between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church is a part of Vatican II. So that was 1965.
Vatican II was kind of a huge deal.
Yeah,
Was a huge deal.
That's
Yeah.
1965.
Cool.
So a little before our lifetime, but last 100 years. So still a big deal. I think that's all we have. So for Graham, AJ, and Thomas, this is us signing off.
Signing off.
Bye.
Bye.